The ship was dying. Everyone on board knew it, even if they could not say it out loud. The Prometheus had been flying through space for 3 years when the fusion core failed. It did not explode. It simply stopped working, like a heart that forgot how to beat. The emergency systems tried to keep things running, but they were never meant to work alone. They were meant to help, not to save. Captain stood on the bridge and watched the warning lights flash red. She was 42 years old. She had trained her whole life for this mission. She had promised 12,000 people that she would take them to a new world, a new beginning. Now she watched that promise die in front of her eyes. The colonists were in cryogenic sleep. They floated in their pods, dreaming of the world they would never see. Men and women, old and young, children who had been born on Earth and would never touch ground again. They did not know they were dying. Perhaps that was a mercy. Did the math in her head. Life support would fail in 6 days. The cryogenic systems would fail in 8. By day 10, everyone would be dead. 12,000 frozen bodies drifting through the empty space between stars. She sent out a distress signal, but she knew no one would hear it. Humanity had only just learned to travel between stars. There were no other ships out here, no colonies, no help. They were alone. Or so she thought. On the 5th day, the sensors detected something. Rushed to the bridge, her heart beating fast. What she saw made her stop breathing. Ships, dozens of them. Huge vessels with designs she had never seen before. They moved through space like predators, circling the Prometheus like wolves around wounded prey. Aliens? Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now had her answer. She just wished she had gotten it under different circumstances. The alien ships did not respond to her signals. They simply watched and waited. Did not know if they were curious or hungry. She did not know if they came in peace or war. All she knew was that her ship had no weapons, no shields, and no way to run. Far away on the largest of the alien vessels, Commander Eth studied the strange ship on his display. He was a species that had ruled this part of the galaxy for 40,000 years. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his eyes were the color of dying suns. The Dominion was old, it was powerful, it was also dying, though Eth did not like to think about that. Their empire had grown too large, too tired, too set in its ways. Rebellions burned on distant worlds, enemies gathered at the borders. The glory days were long past. But the law was still the law, and the law was clear. Unregistered species in Dominion space were to be destroyed. It was not cruelty. It was simply protocol. The galaxy was dangerous, and they had not survived for 40,000 years by taking chances. Eth prepared to give the order. One shot from his main cannon would turn the alien ship into dust. Quick, clean, efficient. But before he could speak, his second-in-command stepped forward. Her name was, she was old for her scales faded to a pale gray. She had served in the fleet for 60 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had killed more enemies than she could count. But something about this ship made her pause. "Commander," she said, "let me board them first." Eth looked at her with surprise. Why? Did not have a good answer. She only knew that she needed to see, she needed to understand. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was something else. She did not know. "Because we are," she said finally, "and we were not always what we are now." Eth did not understand, but he respected. He had served with her for 30 years. He trusted her judgment, even when he did not share it. "You have 1 hour," he said. Took a small shuttle and flew to the human ship. The airlock opened for her and she stepped inside. The air was cold and thin. The lights flickered. The ship smelled like fear and hope and desperation. She walked through the corridors, her weapon ready, but she found no soldiers, no warriors, no threats. She found families. In the cryogenic bay, she saw thousands of pods arranged in careful rows. Inside each pod, a human slept, fathers next to mothers, children next to parents, old next to young. Stopped in front of one pod. Inside was a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. Someone had tucked a small toy beside her, a stuffed animal with soft fur and button eyes. Someone had written a note and placed it in the pod. Could not read the alien words, but she understood their meaning. This was not a warship. This was not an invasion force. This was a family running toward hope. She walked further and found more notes, more toys, more signs of love. She found drawings that children had made. She found photographs of places the humans would never see again. She found letters written by hand, words of comfort and courage and faith. Had conquered worlds. She had burned cities. She had done terrible things in the name of the Dominion. But standing in that cold, dying ship, surrounded by sleeping dreamers, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt shame. There had once been dreamers too. Long ago, before the Empire, before the conquests, before the blood. They had looked at the stars and wondered what was out there. They had built ships not for war, but for discovery. They had believed in something greater than themselves. When had they forgotten? Returned to the fleet. She stood before Commander Eth, and she spoke 7 words that would change history. They dreamed the way we once did. Eth was silent for a long time. Then he did something that broke every law, every protocol, every tradition of the Dominion. He ordered his engineers to repair the human ship. It took 2 days. They fixed the fusion core, refilled the oxygen tanks, and repaired the life support systems. They uploaded star charts showing a safe route to an unclaimed world. They did not explain why. They did not ask for thanks. When the work was done, the Prometheus flew away. Captain never learned the name of the alien who saved them. She only saw the symbol on the officer's ship as it turned away. 3 interlocking crescents, painted in silver on a dark hull. She recorded that symbol. She told her crew to remember it. She did not know what it meant, but she knew what it represented. Mercy from strangers, for no reason at all. 90 years later, the Dominion collapsed. Wars and rebellions tore it apart. The last worlds fell silent. The galaxy moved on and forgot they had ever existed. But on a distant planet called Prometheus Prime, humans built a monument. It was a simple thing, just 3 interlocking crescents carved in stone. Beneath it, they wrote 5 words. We will never forget you. And they never did. 300 years had passed since the Prometheus limped home to safety. 300 years since strangers in the dark showed mercy to dying humans. 300 years, and humanity had not forgotten a single day. The colony ship had reached its destination. The humans had built a world. They called it Prometheus Prime after the ship that carried them, after the myth of the god who gave fire to mankind. They grew and spread. They built more ships. They found more worlds. 200 planets now flew the human flag. Humanity was not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the or the fastest or the most advanced. Dozens of alien empires had better technology, larger fleets, older histories. But humans had something that other species did not understand. They remembered. In the capital city of Prometheus Prime, beneath streets where children played and merchants sold their goods, there was a place that few people knew about. It had no name on any map. It had no sign above its door. It was simply called the Archive. The Archive was a maze of corridors carved deep into the bedrock. Its walls were lined with shelves that held books and data crystals and artifacts from a dead empire. The air smelled of old paper and preservation chemicals. The lights were dim because some of the things stored here were very old and very fragile. This was the home of the keepers of the Crescent. They were not soldiers. They were not politicians. They were scholars, historians, archaeologists, and dreamers. Their mission was simple. They existed to remember the Dominion. They existed to make sure that the species who saved humanity would never be forgotten. Doctor was the youngest director the Archive had ever had. She was 34 years old, small and thin, with black hair that she kept tied back in a practical bun. She had spent her entire adult life studying the. She had learned their language from fragments and recordings. She had mapped their fallen worlds by studying radiation patterns and debris fields. She had reconstructed their art, their music, their poetry, their dreams. They had been gone for over 200 years. Their empire had collapsed before his grandmother was born, but in the archive they were still alive. Every poem they wrote, every song they sang, every law they passed was preserved here, knew them better than she knew her own ancestors. Today, she had called an emergency meeting with the United Human Councils. She stood in a room full of generals and politicians and diplomats, and she showed them what she had found. A survival colony, she said. The room went silent. A small moon on the edge of mapped space. Our long-range sensors picked up their energy signatures 3 months ago. I have spent that time confirming my findings. There is no doubt. She showed them the data. The moon was called Rest in the old language. It was small and cold and hidden in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, and on its surface, perhaps 800 still lived. 800 survivors of a species that the galaxy thought was extinct. They are the last of their kind, said. The final children of the empire that saved our ancestors. They have been hiding for 2 centuries because the galaxy is not kind to the remnants of fallen empires. She paused. She looked at the faces around her. Some showed surprise, some showed confusion. A few showed something that looked like hope. But they are not alone anymore, she continued. The hegemony of has found them too. The room grew colder. Everyone knew they were a confederacy of scavenger species, vultures who fed on the corpses of dead civilizations. They stripped technology from fallen worlds. They sold the bones of extinct species as trophies. They had no honor, no mercy, no respect for anything except profit. They are sending a fleet, said. 40 warships. They will reach Rest in 3 weeks. When they arrive, they will kill everyone they find. They will take everything of value, and then they will truly be extinct. She let those words hang in the air. Then she asked the question that she had been waiting 3 months to ask. What are we going to do about it? For a long moment, no one spoke. The politicians looked at each other nervously. The diplomats calculated risks and rewards. Some of them were already thinking of excuses. They were not human. This was not humanity's problem. They were dangerous and war was expensive. Then Fleet Admiral James stood up. He was an old man, tall and broad, with gray hair and dark skin, and eyes that had seen too many battles. His family had served in the human fleet for 5 generations. His great-great-grandmother had been on the Prometheus when they saved it. 300 years ago, he said, a stranger showed us mercy. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Every child on Prometheus Prime knows this story. Every ship in our fleet carries the symbol of 3 crescents on its hull. We tell our children about them before we tell them about our own history. We remember them in our prayers, in our songs, in our monuments. We have built our entire civilization on the foundation of that one act of kindness. He looked around the room, and his eyes were hard. And now you want to know what we are going to do. You want to calculate costs and benefits. You want to weigh the risks. He slammed his hand on the table. We are going to save them. We are going to send every ship we can spare. We are going to put ourselves between the and the last children of the, and we are going to tell those scavengers that they will not have them. Not today. Not ever. One of the diplomats raised his hand. Admiral, with respect, they have 40 warships. This could start a war. Thousands of humans could die. Looked at him with something like pity. Young man, he said, do you know what makes humanity different from every other species in this galaxy? The diplomat shook his head. Other species fight for territory. They fight for resources. They fight for power. But we fight for something else. We fight for the people who were kind to us. We fight for debts that can never be repaid. We fight for honor. He turned to face the whole room. They gave us everything. They gave us life. They gave us hope. They gave us the stars. And now their children are about to die, and you ask me if we should help them. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. We have waited 300 years to repay this debt. 300 years of remembering. 300 years of preparing. And now, finally, we have the chance to show the galaxy what human gratitude looks like. He straightened his uniform. I am taking the 2nd Expeditionary Fleet to rest. Anyone who wants to stop me is welcome to try. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome aboard. He walked out of the room. Behind him, the politicians and diplomats sat in stunned silence. Within the hour, every military officer in the building had volunteered for the mission. Within the day, civilian ships were requesting permission to join the fleet. Within the week, the largest human armada in history was flying toward a forgotten moon to save 800 strangers. Because that is what humans do. They remember. The fleet arrived at its rest expecting an easy harvest. 40 warships armed with weapons stolen from a dozen dead civilizations. 2,000 warriors hungry for plunder. They had done this 100 times before. Find the survivors of a fallen empire, kill them, take their things, move on to the next corpse. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the small moon below. His sensors showed 800 life signs. 800 hiding in underground bunkers, hoping the galaxy would not find them. He almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Prepare landing parties, he ordered. I want this finished before dinner. Then his sensor officer made a sound that had never heard before. It was something between a gasp and a whimper. Commander, the officer said, there are ships, human ships, between us and the moon. Turned to look at his display. His blood went cold. 112 human vessels hung in the void, battleships and cruisers and destroyers, arranged in a perfect defensive formation. Their hulls were painted with a symbol that did not recognize. 3 interlocking crescents. At the center of the formation was the flagship, a massive vessel called the HSS Memory. On its bridge, Admiral James sat in his command chair and watched the fleet with calm eyes. Open a channel, he said, all frequencies. His communications officer nodded. A moment later, his voice was broadcasting across every ship in the system, human and alike. This is Fleet Admiral James of the United Human Councils. I am speaking to the fleet that has entered this system. You have come here to destroy the last survivors of the Dominion. You will not succeed. On his flagship, listened with a mixture of confusion and amusement. Humans. He had heard of them. A young species, barely 300 years old. They had spread across a few hundred worlds, but they were not warriors. They were dreamers and builders and traders. What were they doing here? They showed humanity kindness when we were dying, continued. They saved our ancestors when they had no reason to do so. We do not forget such things. We do not forgive those who would harm our benefactors. Laughed. This was absurd. They had been dead for 2 centuries. What kind of species remembered a debt for that long? You may turn back now, said. You may leave this system and never return. If you do, there will be no conflict. We have no quarrel with you. Our only purpose is to protect the... He paused. But if you advance, we will fight. And we will not stop fighting until every one of your ships is dust. This is not a threat. This is a promise. The transmission ended, sat in silence for a moment. Then he laughed again. They are bluffing, he said. They have more ships, but we have better weapons. They are soft. They have never fought a real war. Send the attack order. The fleet moved forward. The first hour of the battle went exactly as expected. His ships had better shields, better guns, better training. The humans took heavy losses. 3 cruisers destroyed in the first exchange. A battleship crippled by concentrated fire. Debris and bodies drifting in the void. But then something strange happened. The humans did not retreat. had fought many battles in his life. He understood the mathematics of war. When a force took heavy losses, they pulled back. They regrouped. They looked for better positions. That was how war worked. That was how survival worked. The humans did not seem to understand this. When one of their ships was hit, the others moved forward to cover it. When a captain died, the next officer took command and kept fighting. When weapons failed, crews switched to backup systems. When backup systems failed, they rammed. The HSS Prometheus Dawn, a destroyer with a crew of 200, lost its main guns in the second hour of battle. Its captain, a woman named Sarah, had two choices. She could retreat and save her crew, or she could aim her ship at the nearest cruiser and accelerate. She chose the second option. Her crew did not argue. They did not hesitate. They strapped themselves in and prepared to die. As the ship accelerated toward its target, Captain broadcast one final message. For the Crescents. The explosion destroyed both ships. Watched in disbelief. What is wrong with them? He demanded. Why do they not run? His officers had no answer. They had never seen anything like this. The humans fought like they did not care about dying. They fought like they were their own children. They fought like there was nothing in the universe more important than this moment, this battle, this debt. By the fifth hour, the fleet was taking serious damage. Human tactics were simple but effective. Concentrate fire, protect each other, never give ground. The humans lost ships, yes, but for every human ship that fell, a ship fell with it. And the humans kept coming. In the seventh hour, the flagship lost its shields, ordered a retreat, but it was too late. Human ships surrounded him. Their weapons tore into his hull, his bridge filled with smoke and screaming. The last thing saw was the HSS Memory bearing down on him. The human flagship was badly damaged. Its hull was cracked and bleeding atmosphere. Its engines were failing. But it was still coming, still fighting, still refusing to die. The battle ended in the 11th hour. 29 human ships were destroyed. 31 more were so badly damaged that they would never fly again. 4,000 human sailors had died in the void, their bodies drifting among the wreckage. Not a single vessel survived. On the moon below, 800 watched their sensors in stunned silence. They had expected death. They had prepared for the end of their species. Instead, they had watched strangers die for them. Admiral's shuttle was the first to land. The old man was wounded. His left arm hung useless at his side and blood stained his uniform, but he walked with his head held high. The elder came to meet him. Her name was. She was very old, her scales pale and thin, her eyes clouded with age. She had been a child when her grandmother told her stories of a strange ship full of sleeping aliens and an officer who orders to save them. She had never expected to see a human in her lifetime. She had certainly never expected to see a human bleed for her. Stopped in front of her. For a moment he simply looked at her, this fragile creature from a species that had once ruled the stars. Then, slowly and painfully, he lowered himself to one knee. "Your people saved ours," he said. 300 years ago when we were lost and dying, an officer showed us mercy. She gave us life. She gave us hope. She gave us everything." He looked up with eyes full of tears. "We have never forgotten. We will never forget. And as long as humanity exists, no harm will come to your people. This I swear on my life and the lives of everyone who died here today." Stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and touched his face. "We were kind to you once," she whispered. "Just once. A small thing, a moment of mercy." Smiled through his tears. "There is no such thing as a small kindness," he said. "Every act of mercy is infinite. Every moment of compassion echoes forever. Your officer saved 12,000 people 300 years ago. Today, her kindness saved 800 more." He took his hand in his. "The debt is not repaid. It can never be repaid, but we will spend eternity trying." Above them, the wreckage of battle drifted silently through the stars. Human ships and ships tangled together in death. 4,000 humans who had given their lives for strangers. And on a forgotten moon, two species stood together and wept. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. At first, no one believed it. The reports seemed impossible. A young species called humanity had sent a fleet to save 800 refugees from a dead empire. They had fought against superior numbers. They had lost thousands of their own people. They had destroyed an entire raiding force. For what? For a debt 300 years old. For kindness shown by strangers who were long dead. For honor. The older species of the galaxy did not understand. They gathered in their councils and debated what this meant. Some said the humans were insane. Some said they were stupid. Some said they were lying, that there must be some hidden motive, some secret resource on that moon, some political advantage they were chasing. Then the evidence arrived. Recordings from the battle, censored data from neutral observers, interviews with survivors, the wreckage of 60 human ships drifting in space, surrounded by the shattered remains of the fleet. It was all true. The hegemony of collapsed within a year. Their reputation was built on fear, and fear cannot survive such humiliation. The other scavenger species watched the mighty brought low by a young race they had never heard of. They decided that perhaps scavenging was not such a profitable business after all. But they were not the only ones who learned from the Battle of Srest. On the trading world of Nexus Prime, the Merchants Guild held an emergency meeting. They represented 40 species and controlled half the commerce in the quadrant. They were very practical beings who dealt in profit and loss. "What do we know about these humans?" asked the guild master, a tall named Ara. "Very little," admitted her intelligence officer. "They are young, 300 years in space, 200 colony worlds, average technology, average military, nothing special. And yet they just destroyed the most feared raiding force in the sector." "Yes." Ara clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Why?" The intelligence officer shifted uncomfortably. "Because 300 years ago, a species called the helped one of their ships. The humans consider this a debt of honor. They have spent 3 centuries preparing to repay it." The room was silent. The merchants looked at each other with something approaching fear. 3 centuries, Ara said slowly. They remembered a kindness for 3 centuries, and they sacrificed thousands of their own to repay it. She turned to face the council. "Consider what this means for us. Consider every interaction we have had with humans, every deal we made, every promise we kept, every promise we broke." The silence grew heavier. "If they remember kindness for 3 centuries, Ara continued, how long do they remember betrayal?" Within a month, the Merchants Guild had returned every piece of property they had ever taken unfairly from human traders. They paid back every disputed debt. They sent formal apologies for every insult, real or imagined. They did not want to find out what human memory meant for their enemies. They were not alone. Across the galaxy, species began to reconsider their relationships with humanity. The Empire had once refused to help a stranded human exploration vessel, leaving its crew to die slowly in the void. Now the Emperor himself traveled to human space to apologize. He brought gifts. He offered treaties. He asked, in a voice that trembled slightly, if humans might find it in their hearts to forgive. The humans forgave him, but they also remembered. The collective of Teeth, a warrior culture that had mocked humans as weak and sentimental, suddenly found reasons to respect them. Being willing to die for a 300-year-old debt was not weakness. It was the opposite of weakness. It was strength of a kind that the collective had never encountered. Even the ancient species, the ones who had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, began to pay attention. They had seen countless young races rise and fall. Most were forgotten within a few thousand years. But there was something different about humans, something new. They did not conquer. They did not dominate. They simply remembered. And in a galaxy where empires rose and fell like waves on a shore, memory was more powerful than any weapon. Meanwhile, on Prometheus Prime, humanity celebrated its victory. But the celebration was quiet and solemn. 4,000 sailors had died its rest. Their names were carved into a monument that stretched for miles. Every human child would learn those names. Every human child would know what they died for. The 800 survivors were brought to human space. They expected to be placed in a camp somewhere, given basic supplies and left alone. Instead, they found themselves treated like royalty. Human families competed for the honor of hosting guests. Human universities created entire departments dedicated to studying culture. Human artists painted faces. Human musicians learned songs. Human children grew up with nursery rhymes. Elder watched all of this with wonder and confusion. One day, she asked Admiral a question that had been bothering her since the battle. "Why," she said, "I understand gratitude, I understand honor, but this goes beyond anything I have ever seen. You lost 4,000 people. You are spending fortunes on us. You have made us the center of your culture. Why?" Smiled. He was an old man now, retired from the fleet, spending his final years making sure they were cared for. He thought about her question for a long time before answering. "When your officer saved our ship," he said, "she did not just save 12,000 lives. She showed us something about the universe. She showed us that kindness was possible, that strangers could help each other, that mercy existed even in the cold darkness between stars." He looked out the window at the city below, where human and walked together. "That changed us. It changed what we believed. It changed what we wanted to be. Every good thing humanity has done since then has been built on the foundation of that one act of kindness. Your officer did not just save our ancestors. She made us who we are." Was silent for a moment. "And now you want to do the same for us," she said. Nodded. "Your empire is gone, your worlds are dust. Your people are scattered and afraid, but we will not let you disappear. We will remember you. We will celebrate you. We will make sure that the galaxy never forgets the—" He took her hand. "And someday, when your people are strong again, you will do the same for someone else. That is how kindness works. It spreads. It grows. It echoes through time. Your officer showed mercy once, and now that mercy is changing the galaxy." The project to rebuild civilization began the next year. Human engineers traveled to the ruins of Prime. They studied the broken buildings, the shattered monuments, the scattered records. They learned how they had built, how they had lived, how they had dreamed. Then they began to rebuild. It would take 200 years. It would cost more than any human project in history. Thousands of humans would dedicate their lives to this work, and many would never see it completed. But they did it anyway. Because that is what you do for family. And they were family now. The strange, quiet, reptilian survivors who had once ruled the stars were now the beloved cousins of humanity. Their language was taught in human schools. Their holidays were celebrated on human worlds. Their symbol, the three interlocking crescents, flew on every human vessel. The galaxy watched in amazement as humans poured their resources into saving a dead culture. It made no sense. It had no profit. It had no strategic value. But that was the point. Some things are more important than profit. Some things are more important than strategy. Some things are worth everything you have, simply because they are right. Humanity understood this, and slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to understand it too. Change was coming, a change that would reshape how species treated each other, a change that would echo across 1,000 years. And it all began with a single act of kindness, 3 centuries ago, in the cold darkness between stars. 1,000 years had passed since the Prometheus drifted helplessly through the void. The galaxy had changed, old empires had fallen, new powers had risen, Stars had been born and died, but some things remained constant, some things endured. Humanity was still here. They had spread across 1,000 worlds now. They were not the largest empire, not the most powerful, not the most feared, but they were respected, they were trusted, they were remembered. And they were here too. 12 million of them now lived across 8 beautiful worlds. Planets that humanity had terraformed at impossible cost, shaping oceans and atmospheres to match the ancient. Cities that human architects had rebuilt from fragments and memories and dreams. A civilization reborn from the ashes of extinction. It had taken 2 centuries to complete the work, 2 centuries of sacrifice and dedication. Thousands of humans had spent their entire lives on this project, knowing they would never see it finished. They did it anyway because some things were more important than a single lifetime. And now, on the anniversary of the Battle of Rest, the galaxy gathered to celebrate. Ships from 100 species filled the space around Prime. Not warships, but vessels carrying diplomats and scholars and ordinary beings who had come to witness something remarkable. On the surface below, millions of humans stood together under a sky that had been empty for centuries. The matriarch stood on a platform overlooking the crowd. Her name was Aura, and she was a direct descendant of the officer who had saved the Prometheus so long ago. For centuries, the humans had searched through recovered Dominion records to find that officer's name. They had never given up, and finally, they had succeeded. Her name was the same name that humans had given to their flagship, the same name that appeared in human prayers and songs and monuments. She had been dead for 900 years, but her name was more famous now than it had ever been in her lifetime. Aura looked out at the crowd, and humans standing together, united by a bond that had lasted for a millennium. She thought about her ancestor, who had made an illegal choice to save strangers. She thought about the humans, who had spent 1,000 years repaying that kindness. She began to speak. "The galaxy measures power in weapons and territory," she said. Her voice was carried by speakers to every corner of the planet. "Empires rise and fall. The strong conquer the weak are forgotten. This is the way of things. This has always been the way." She paused, looking at the human delegation. At their head stood a young officer named, descended from the admiral who had bled at Srest a millennium ago. His family had never stopped serving. They never would. "But humanity taught the galaxy something new," Aura continued. "They taught us that a single act of mercy can echo across 1,000 years. They taught us that the forgotten can be remembered. They taught us that the dead can live again, through those who refuse to let them die." She gestured at the city around her, at the buildings that human hands had rebuilt, at the gardens that human scientists had restored, at the libraries that human scholars had filled with recovered texts. "My people should not exist," she said. "Our empire fell, our worlds burned, our children starved in the dark. By every law of the galaxy, we should be bones and dust." Her voice grew stronger. "But a human remembered, and then all humans remembered, and they have never stopped remembering. For 1,000 years they have carried us in their hearts. They have taught their children our songs. They have celebrated our holidays. They have made our history part of their own." She turned to face directly. "You asked us once what you could do to repay your debt. You have spent 1,000 years trying to answer that question. So let me give you the answer now." She walked forward until she stood face to face with him. Human and 2 species, separated by biology, united by something stronger. "The debt is paid," she said. The words hung in the air. 1,000 years of memory, 1,000 years of sacrifice, 1,000 years of gratitude. "It was paid the moment you chose to remember," Aura continued. "It was paid when you taught your children our name. It was paid when you carved our symbol into your ships. It was paid with every life lost at Rest, and every life spent rebuilding what we had lost." She reached out and took his hands. "You have made our name immortal. You have ensured that the will never be forgotten, not in 1,000 years, not in 10,000, not while humanity exists. And in doing so, you have made yourselves immortal too. She turned back to the crowd. 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, when new empires rise and fall and the stars themselves grow cold, beings will tell the story of the humans, not because you conquered, not because you ruled, not because you were stronger or faster or more advanced than anyone else. She smiled. They will tell your story because when a stranger showed you kindness, you made it sacred. When you received mercy, you spent eternity repaying it. When you were given life, you gave life in return. She raised her voice, and it rang across the planet. And that is the only immortality that matters. The crowd erupted, and human cheering and weeping together. 1,000 years of shared history, 1,000 years of hope. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The message of rest spread beyond human space. Other species heard the story and were moved by it. They began to look at their own histories differently. They began to remember old debts, old kindnesses, old acts of mercy that they had forgotten. The Empire established a fund to help species displaced by war. The collective of Teeth began taking in refugees from destroyed worlds. The Merchants Guild created a charity to support the survivors of fallen civilizations. It was not much. The galaxy was still vast and cold and often cruel. Empires still fought, species still died, injustice still existed. But something had changed. On a distant world, a dying species received help from strangers. Vessels arrived without warning, bringing food and medicine and hope. The rescuers wore a symbol on their ships, a symbol that they said meant something important. They said they had heard a story once about humans and crescents and a debt that could never be repaid. They said they wanted to create their own story, their own debt, their own immortality. The humans smiled when they heard about this. They smiled and nodded and said nothing, because this was what they had always wanted, not gratitude, not glory, not power. Just this. Kindness spreading through the galaxy like ripples in a pond, mercy becoming sacred, memory becoming immortal. 1,000 years ago, a single officer had made an illegal choice to save strangers. She had not known what would come of it. She had simply done what seemed right. And now, 1,000 years later, her choice had changed the universe. That is the power of kindness. That is the weight of memory. That is what it means to be truly immortal. Not through conquest, not through power, through mercy. The stars burned on, cold and ancient and endless. Empires rose and fell like waves on a shore. Species lived and died and were forgotten. But somewhere in the darkness, beings told stories about a race called humanity, about how they remembered, about how they repaid, about how they turned a single act of kindness into a legacy that would last forever. And that legacy kept spreading, growing, echoing. Forever.